Heavenly Light and Shadowed Hearts. Chapter 1. The Boy Under the Tree and the Girl with Sunbeam Hair. The park was ordinary. It had a rusty swing set, a slide that got too hot in the summer, and a large, spreading oak tree that was perfect for hiding under. That's where the boy was. His name was Jin. He was 7 years old, with messy black hair and eyes that seemed a little too serious for a child. He liked the shade under the tree. The sunlight felt loud, sometimes. Here, with a book about stars in his lap, it was quiet. A few yards away, the girl was anything but quiet. Her name was Lumi, and she was a small explosion of energy and golden curls. At 6 years old, she believed the world was made for running through. She was currently trying to convince a grumpy-looking pigeon to be her friend. "Come on, I have crumbs," she chirped, holding out a tiny hand. The pigeon pecked at the ground, unimpressed. Lumi took a step, tripped over her own untied shoelace, and tumbled forward with a yelp. The crumbs flew, the pigeon fled, and Lumi landed softly in a patch of clover, right at the edge of the oak tree's shadow. Jin looked up from his book. He saw a heap of bright pink overalls and blonde hair. He waited for crying. It didn't come. Instead, the girl sat up, blinked her big, sky-blue eyes and laughed. "Whoa, that was a good one." Jin stared. Most kids cried. This one laughed at gravity. Lumi noticed him. "Hi, I'm Lumi. What are you reading?" She didn't wait for an invitation. She scrambled over and plopped down beside him, her presence instantly making the shady spot feel warmer. "It's about constellations," Jin said quietly, holding the book so she could see the pictures of connect that stars. "Oh, I love stars. They're like little lights in the big blanket of the sky," Lumi said, pointing a grubby finger at the page. "That one looks like a grumpy cat." Jin looked at the constellation of Leo. It did not look like a grumpy cat, but the way she said it, he could sort of see it. A small, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "Maybe. I live over there," Lumi announced, pointing to a house with a sunny yellow door across the street. "Do you live close?" Jin nodded, pointing in the opposite direction to a house with a deep blue door, half hidden by a tall fence. "There. We're neighbors," Lumi declared, as if they just discovered they were both royalty. "Do you want to play? I'm trying to find the best cloud, but the pigeon was distracting me." Jin usually said no to playing. It was too much running, too much noise. But Lumi's question didn't feel like a demand. It felt like an offer. And looking at the clouds did sound peaceful. "Okay," he said. That afternoon, under the vast, gentle sky, the quiet boy who loved shadows and the loud girl who was basically a sunbeam became friends. Jin showed Lumi how to find the shapes in the clouds. Not just fluffy or big, but a sailing ship, a sleeping dragon. Lumi showed Jin how to make a daisy chain, her small fingers surprisingly quick and clever. When the sun began to dip, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, they walked to the edge of the park together. "Bye, Jin. See you tomorrow under the tree," Lumi waved, skipping towards her yellow door. "Bye, Lumi," Jin said, his voice soft. He walked to his blue door, feeling strangely lighter. The quiet of his house, which he usually loved, felt a little emptier than before. Heavenly Light and Shadowed Hearts. Chapter 1. The Boy Under the Tree and the Girl with Sunbeam Hair. The park was ordinary. It had a rusty swing set, a slide that got too hot in the summer, and a large, spreading oak tree that was perfect for hiding under. That's where the boy was. His name was Jin. He was 7 years old, with messy black hair and eyes that seemed a little too serious for a child. He liked the shade under the tree. The sunlight felt loud, sometimes. Here, with a book about stars in his lap, it was quiet. A few yards away, the girl was anything but quiet. Her name was Lumi, and she was a small explosion of energy and golden curls. At 6 years old, she believed the world was made for running through. She was currently trying to convince a grumpy-looking pigeon to be her friend. "Come on, I have crumbs," she chirped, holding out a tiny hand. The pigeon pecked at the ground, unimpressed. Lumi took a step, tripped over her own untied shoelace, and tumbled forward with a yelp. The crumbs flew, the pigeon fled, and Lumi landed softly in a patch of clover, right at the edge of the oak tree's shadow. Jin looked up from his book. He saw a heap of bright pink overalls and blonde hair. He waited for crying. It didn't come. Instead, the girl sat up, blinked her big, sky-blue eyes and laughed. "Whoa, that was a good one." Jin stared. Most kids cried. This one laughed at gravity. Lumi noticed him. "Hi, I'm Lumi. What are you reading?" She didn't wait for an invitation. She scrambled over and plopped down beside him, her presence instantly making the shady spot feel warmer. "It's about constellations," Jin said quietly, holding the book so she could see the pictures of connect that stars. "Oh, I love stars. They're like little lights in the big blanket of the sky," Lumi said, pointing a grubby finger at the page. "That one looks like a grumpy cat." Jin looked at the constellation of Leo. It did not look like a grumpy cat, but the way she said it, he could sort of see it. A small, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "Maybe. I live over there," Lumi announced, pointing to a house with a sunny yellow door across the street. "Do you live close?" Jin nodded, pointing in the opposite direction to a house with a deep blue door, half hidden by a tall fence. "There. We're neighbors," Lumi declared, as if they just discovered they were both royalty. "Do you want to play? I'm trying to find the best cloud, but the pigeon was distracting me." Jin usually said no to playing. It was too much running, too much noise. But Lumi's question didn't feel like a demand. It felt like an offer. And looking at the clouds did sound peaceful. "Okay," he said. That afternoon, under the vast, gentle sky, the quiet boy who loved shadows and the loud girl who was basically a sunbeam became friends. Jin showed Lumi how to find the shapes in the clouds. Not just fluffy or big, but a sailing ship, a sleeping dragon. Lumi showed Jin how to make a daisy chain, her small fingers surprisingly quick and clever. When the sun began to dip, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, they walked to the edge of the park together. "Bye, Jin. See you tomorrow under the tree," Lumi waved, skipping towards her yellow door. Bye, Lumi, Jin said, his voice soft. He walked to his blue door, feeling strangely lighter. The quiet of his house, which he usually loved, felt a little emptier than before. Chapter 3. The First Fracture. Echoes of a Forgotten Storm. It started when they were 12. They were at a sleepover at Lumi's house, a fort of blankets and pillows constructed in the living room. The TV was playing a silly cartoon, but they were both half asleep, full of popcorn. Jin drifted off first. His dream was not a dream. He was standing on a plain of broken, dark stone that stretched forever under a starless sky. The air was cold and silent, a silence that pressed on his ears. He was taller, impossibly tall, and clad in armor that drank the light. In his hand was a sword of pure, chilling darkness. Power thrummed through him, a vast, terrible, and lonely power. He was a king, but his throne was made of solitude. He looked across the void, and he felt a deep, ancient, and bitter rage. His target was a distant, blinding light. He woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. His heart was pounding like a war drum. The cozy blanket fort felt like a cage. Across the pillows, Lumi also jolted awake. Her face was pale, her usually bright eyes wide with fright. She was trembling. Jin? Her voice was a whisper. You too? He asked, his own voice rough. A nightmare? Lumi breathed, pulling her knees to her chest. A really, really bad one. I was flying, but not fun flying. There was so much light and I was so angry. And there was this shadow. A big, dark king. And I had to fight it. I had to destroy it. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning went down Jin's spine. A dark king? He echoed. Yeah, felt real. Like I'd been there before. She shook her head, her golden curls flying. Stupid. Too much pizza. Jin didn't think it was stupid. The cold, lonely power from his dream still clung to him. The target of his dream rage had been a brilliant, painful light. He didn't tell her that part. It was just a dream, he said, forcing his voice to be calm. The anchor for her kite. A scary movie we saw last week probably. Yeah, Lumi said, latching onto the explanation. She uncurled a little. Probably. They didn't go back to sleep. They talked about school and comics until the sun came up, carefully avoiding any mention of kings, shadows, or blinding light. But the dreams didn't stop. They came every few months, never the same but always familiar. Lumi would dream of crystalline cities in the clouds, of wielding light like a whip, of a sacred duty to cleanse the darkness. She'd feel a holy, burning fury. Jin would dream of a serene, dark citadel among floating mountains, of commanding legions of silent warriors, of a profound duty to balance the searing arrogance of light with gentle, necessary shadow. He'd feel a cold, resentful wrath. They never told each other the full details. Felt too private, too scary, too real. But they developed a silent understanding. On the mornings after, they would find each other. No words were needed. Sometimes they'd just sit together under their oak tree. Sometimes Lumi would talk a mile a minute about nothing, filling the silence left by the nightmares. Sometimes Jin would just hand her a juice box and their favorite comic book. They were protecting each other from the ghosts in their own heads, not knowing they were guarding each other from the echoes of their own pasts. Chapter 4. Waking Power. A spark in the dark. The first time it happened, Jin was 13. He was in his room, a tidy space painted a deep navy blue. He was carefully assembling a delicate model spaceship. Lumi had given it to him for his birthday, declaring it would help him reach for the stars, since he liked them so much. His hand slipped. The tiny, finely detailed engine nacelle snapped off, flying from his fingers and skittering across the floor. He heard a faint crack. No, he groaned. It was the most important piece. The model would be ruined without it. Frustration and a sudden, deep sadness washed over him. He'd been so careful. He just wanted to put together the beautiful thing his best friend had given him. He stared at the two broken pieces on the floor, wishing with all his might that he could just fix it. That things didn't have to be so fragile. A strange coldness bloomed in his chest, not unpleasant, like the feeling of stepping into a deep cave on a hot day. He felt a gentle tug, like a thread being pulled. From his fingertips, a wisp of something darker than shadow, smooth and cool like liquid silk, drifted out. It was barely visible, more of a deepening of the air around the broken pieces. The wisp wrapped around the plastic. Jin watched, eyes wide, holding his breath. He saw the crack seem to shrink, the molecules of plastic whispering back together as if the break had never happened. A faint, purple-black sheen, like the wing of a dark butterfly, glowed for a millisecond on the repaired seam, then vanished. The cold feeling retreated. The room felt normal again. Jin sat frozen for a full minute. Then he slowly, carefully picked up the engine piece. It was whole, perfect. Not a seam, not a scratch. His heart hammered against his ribs. What was that? He looked at his hands. They looked normal. He thought about the cold feeling, the wisp. Felt familiar, like the feeling in his dreams, but tiny, a single drop from an ocean. Did I imagine it? He thought. The light had been low. He was tired. He must have just seen wrong. The piece couldn't have been broken that badly. That was it. He attached the engine to the model. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He didn't tell anyone, not even Lumi. What would he say? I think I magically fixed plastic with darkness? She'd laugh her wonderful, loud laugh and call him a silly, creative dreamer. He decided to forget it, but he couldn't. Sometimes, when he wished for something small and quiet, for his mother's headache to fade, for a lost key to appear, he'd feel that faint, cool thread in his chest. He never dared pull on it again. He was a little afraid of it. Chapter 5. Waking Power. A bloom in the palm. Lumi's turn came a few months later. She was in her backyard. A sunny, chaotic garden full of her mother's attempts at growing vegetables and Lumi's attempts at building fairy houses. Her favorite plant was a small, struggling sunflower in a pot by the back step. It had been knocked over in a storm, and despite her careful nursing, It was looking sad. Its leaves were drooping, its stem bent, its head bowed as if in shame. Come on, Sonny, Lumi whispered to it, giving it a little water. You can do it. Just be happy. Get better. She felt a surge of love for the little plant, and a fierce, protective desire for it to live. She wanted it to stand tall and face the sun, like it was meant to. As she had this thought, a warmth bloomed in her chest. It was different from the heat of the sun. It was a golden, soothing warmth, like drinking hot chocolate on a cold day. It spread down her arm to her fingertips, which were resting on the sunflower's wilted leaves. A soft, golden light, so faint it could have been a trick of the afternoon sun, glowed from her touch. It was the color of honey and buttercups. For just a second, the light soaked into the plant. The change was immediate. The stem stiffened, straightening up. The leaves perked up, turning a vibrant, healthy green. The drooping flower head lifted, and before Lumi's astonished eyes, a few new, bright yellow petals unfurled. The plant looked healthier than it ever had. The warmth in her chest faded. The golden light was gone. Lumi snatched her hand back as if burned. She stared at the sunflower, then at her hand. Whoa, she breathed. She looked around quickly. No one had seen. Her mom was inside. The yard was empty. What was that? Excitement bubbled up in her, mixed with a thread of fear. Had she just healed a plant? With light? It felt incredible, like a secret superpower. But then the logical part of her brain, the part that was friends with Jin, kicked in. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the plant was just finally ready to get better. Maybe the sun hit it at the right angle and it looked like glow. Yeah, that made more sense. People didn't just make plants better with golden light. That was for movies and comics. She decided it was a happy accident, a moment of perfect timing. But she found herself talking to the sunflower more often, touching other sad plants, hoping to feel that wonderful warmth again. Sometimes, she thought she felt a tiny spark, but nothing as obvious as that first time. She kept it to herself. Telling Jin would make it too real, and if it wasn't real, she'd feel silly. And if it was real, she wasn't sure what that meant. Chapter 6. The Library of Echoes. High school brought them to the city library, a massive stone building that smelled of dust and wisdom. They were 15, and a history project had them digging through the mythology section. Ugh, Greek gods are so dramatic, Lumi whispered, slamming a heavy book about Zeus, all lightning bolts and turning people into animals. Jin murmured, already lost in a book about Norse legends. He liked the order of it, the world tree, the sense of inevitable fate. Lumi wandered down a dim, dusty aisle labeled Obscure Pantheons and Apocrypha. The books here were older, their spines cracked. One thin, black-bound volume with no title slipped halfway off the shelf. Curious, Lumi pulled it out. The pages were brittle. The text was an old-fashioned, looping script, but there were illustrations. One made her blood run cold. It showed a being of terrifying majesty, clad in armor of void and starlight, standing atop a mountain of shadows. The caption, in faded ink, read, The Heavenly Demon God, not evil but the necessary balance to cosmic arrogance. The sovereign of eternal twilight, who was cast down. The figure's face was obscured, but the feeling she got from the image was the same cold, lonely fury from her nightmares. She slammed the book shut, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Jin had found a scroll-like manuscript under a glass case. It was a translated fragment. One illuminated image showed a goddess of stunning beauty and unbearable radiance, wielding a spear of pure light, her face a mask of righteous wrath. The text read, The Goddess of Primordial Light, the purifying flame, the bane of shadows, she who fractured the world to imprison the creeping dark. The searing, holy anger in the goddess's depicted eyes was the same from his dreams. A chill settled in his stomach. They met back at their usual table, their faces pale. Find anything? Jin asked, trying to sound normal. Just weird old stories, Lumi said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You? Same. Nonsense myths. They looked at each other for a long moment. A silent understanding passed between them. They had both found something. Something that touched the dark, secret corners of their nightmares. And they were both deciding, right then, to protect the other from it. Lumi thought, that dark god. It's just a story. But if it's not, I can't let anything like that near Jin. He's too gentle. Jin thought, that goddess of light. She's just a legend. But if she's real, her fury could burn the whole world. I have to keep Lumi safe from that kind of rage. They packed up in silence. As they left the library, the shadow of the great stone building seemed to stretch longer towards Jin, while the setting sun seemed to leave one last, brilliant beam directly on Lumi's golden hair. Chapter 7. A silent oath in moonlight. That night, the nightmares were worse. Vivid, brutal, full of the sounds of clashing armies and shattering realms. Jin woke up covered in a cold sweat, the echo of a scream. Not his own, a radiant, female scream, dying in his ears. The loneliness from the dream was a physical ache. The only thing that made it better was thinking of Lumi's laugh. Lumi woke up trembling. The afterimage of a dark blade of shadow slicing through light burned on her eyelids. She felt a hollow, sacred duty that felt like a chain. The only thing that felt warm and real was the memory of Jin's quiet, steady voice. They couldn't sleep. By unspoken agreement, they both crept out of their homes. They met, as they always did when the world felt wrong, under their oak tree in the park. It was past midnight, and the world was silvered by a full moon. For a while they just sat, shoulders touching, listening to the crickets. Those stories in the library, Lumi finally said, her voice small. They were scary. Yes, Jin agreed simply. I hate the idea of it, Lumi whispered, looking up at the moon. A god and a goddess or whatever, just fighting forever, hating each other, destroying things because one is light and one is dark. She shuddered. It's so stupid. Light and dark need each other. You can't see stars without darkness. You can't have a shadow without light. Jin looked at her, surprised. She had put his own swirling thoughts into perfect words. Yeah, he said. It's a pointless war. Another silence, comfortable this time. Then Lumi said with fierce determination. Nothing like that is ever going to happen to us, Jin. No ancient wars, no dumb cosmic enemies. We're just Lumi and Jin. I won't let any of that storybook nonsense touch you. She meant it. She would stand between her gentle, shadow-loving friend and any terrifying heavenly demon god. Hearing her say that, hearing the protective fire in her voice for him, made something in Jin's chest tighten warmly. He looked at her, her face pale and serious in the moonlight, and made his own promise. And I won't let anything hurt you, Lumi, he said, his voice low and more serious than she'd ever heard it. Not even a goddess with all the light in the world. He would shield his bright, laughing friend from the scorching wrath of any primordial goddess. They were both swearing to protect the other from themselves, and they had no idea. The moon shone down on them, casting their two shadows, side by side, onto the grass. One slightly darker and more defined than it should have been, the other fringed with a barely perceptible silver glow. Chapter 8. The Unseen Dance. Life went on, but now their secret powers, tiny as they were, began to dance around each other, invisible and gentle. It became a series of lucky coincidences, of weird happenings that only ever occurred when they were together. They were walking home from school when a heavy book slipped from a student's overstuffed bag above them, tumbling directly towards Lumi's head. Jin, without even thinking, felt a flutter of panic and that cool thread in his chest twitched. A patch of shadow on the ground between the shelves seemed to deepen just as the book hit it. The book's fall slowed, just for an instant, as if it had landed on a pillow of dark air, and it landed with a soft thump by Lumi's feet instead of on her head. Whoa, lucky. Lumi laughed, picking up the book. It's like it changed its mind. Jin just nodded, his heart beating fast. Did I do that? Another time, on a bitterly cold winter day, they were waiting for the bus. Jin hated the cold. It seeped into his bones. He was shivering slightly, trying to hide it. Lumi, standing close to him, thought, I wish I could make him warm. That warm, golden feeling sparked in her chest. Faint but there. She didn't know how to send it out, but she leaned a little closer. A tiny, almost invisible shimmer of heat, like the air over a hot road, radiated from her side. The biting wind around Jin suddenly felt less sharp, replaced by a gentle, sunny warmth, as if he were standing in a small, personal patch of sunlight. Huh, Jin said, stopping his shivering. The wind died down. Yeah, lucky us, Lumi chirped, smiling to herself. Their powers were instinctively protecting and comforting the other. Jin's shadows gently steered trouble away from Lumi. Lumi's light subtly warmed and cheered Jin. They never saw the effects directly, only the fortunate results. It felt natural, like part of their friendship. Jin's calm was Lumi's shelter. Lumi's energy was Jin's warmth. They just didn't know it was also literally true. Chapter 9. University Days. A heart's unspoken language. University took them to the same big city campus. Jin studied library science and archival restoration. Lumi, after much debate, chose horticultural science. I get to name plant colors and help them grow. They got a small apartment together as friends. It made financial sense, they told their parents. It was just practical. Neither mentioned the sheer, simple joy of coming home to the other person. Their friendship deepened, but new, confusing feelings began to swirl beneath the surface, colored by a strange, possessive jealousy they didn't understand. Lumi joined a lively gardening club. She came home one day, talking a mile a minute about a guy named Mark who knew everything about succulents. Jin, who was carefully restoring a water-damaged sketchbook, felt a sudden, sharp chill in his chest. It wasn't the cool, controlled feeling of his shadow power. This was colder, darker, a prickle of something ancient and territorial. The pen in his hand left a faint, unexpected black streak of ink on the page, like a tiny bolt of dark lightning. He sounds knowledgeable, Jin said, his voice perfectly level even as he felt absurdly irritated by succulent Mark. Yeah, he's nice, Lumi said, oblivious. She noticed the room felt cooler. Is the AC on too high? Must be, Jin said, the cold feeling in his chest slowly fading, replaced by confusion at his own reaction. The reverse happened at the university library, where Jin worked part-time. A shy literature student named Clara started asking Jin for help finding obscure poetry collections. She would smile softly and talk in a quiet voice. Lumi came to meet him one afternoon and saw them together at the reference desk, their heads bent over a book. A sudden, hot spark flared in Lumi's chest. Not her healing warmth, but a sharper, brighter flash of something indignant. The fluorescent light directly above Clara's head flickered and buzzed violently for a second before settling down. Ready to go? Lumi asked, her voice a little too bright. She linked her arm tightly through Jin's as they left, throwing a sunny, dismissive smile at Clara that didn't quite reach her eyes. Who was that? She asked casually once outside. Just a student. Needs help with metaphysical poetry, Jin said. Humph. Metaphysical is just a fancy word for confusing, Lumi declared, and Jin laughed, the strange incident forgotten. They were orbiting each other, two planets caught in a gravitational pull they couldn't name. Love was growing, tangled up with an instinctive, divine-level possessiveness they mistook for simple friendship jealousy. Their powers, echoes of their true selves, reacted to these emotions in tiny, unnoticed ways. Their apartment became a blend of them. His neat bookshelves next to her overflowing pots of herbs, his dark blue towels beside her yellow ones, the quiet corner with his reading lamp adjacent to the sunny spot with her yoga mat. It was home, and they were both secretly, desperately in love with their best friend, terrified of ruining what they had. Chapter 10. The Catalyst. A modern cultivation incident. It was a street festival downtown. The air smelled of fried food and excitement. Jin and Lumi were wandering through the crowd, sharing a giant bag of sweet popcorn. Near the main stage, a crowd had gathered. A man in flowing silk robes, very out of place, was demonstrating what he called the ancient art of chi manipulation. He looked like a performer. He made a big show of focusing, then pushed his palms forward. With a visible ripple in the air, a stack of tiles in front of him shattered. The crowd oohed and awed. Most saw a clever magic trick or a demonstration of focused force. Jin and Lumi saw something else. To Jin, the man's released chi looked like a weak, messy, and crude puff of distorted energy. It was offensive to his senses like a screeching off-key note. Without thinking, his body reacted to shield himself and, more importantly, Lumi. That cool, deep well inside him stirred. A blanket of serene, profound darkness, invisible to everyone else, gently wrapped around the two of them, nullifying the chaotic ripple of energy before it could reach them. The air around Jin and Lumi grew still and silent for a second, the festival noise dampening. At the exact same moment, Lumi was also repulsed. The man's energy felt grubby and impure to her. Her instinct was to cleanse it, to protect Jin from its sloppy touch. That warm, golden reservoir within her flickered. A pulse of pure, calming light, invisible to the human eye, emanated from her, washing over the space between them and the stage, sanitizing the residual energy. The space around her and Jin seemed to brighten with a clean, clear light for an instant. Their powers, reacting to the same perceived threat, flared in perfect, opposing harmony. The man on stage staggered, his next chi blast fizzling into nothing. He looked around, confused, his eyes scanning the crowd and sliding right past Jin and Lumi, as if he couldn't quite focus on them. Jin and Lumi looked at each other. The popcorn bag was frozen between them. They both felt it, the simultaneous internal reaction, the familiar personal sensation of their secret quirks activating. His cool shadow, her warm light, but stronger than ever before, and at the same time. Did you feel that? Lumi whispered, her eyes wide. A weird pressure change, Jin said carefully, his mind racing. She felt it too, but how could she feel my whatever it is? Yeah, like the air got heavy, then super fresh, Lumi said, latching onto the physical description. Must be a weather thing. Over the crowd. Yeah, Jin agreed, the word feeling hollow. A weather thing. But as they turned and walked away from the festival, the noise of the crowd fading behind them, a seed of doubt was planted in both their hearts. The coincidence was getting harder to ignore. The shared nightmares, the lucky breaks, the strange comfort they felt from each other. And now this simultaneous, powerful reaction to something unnatural. Jin thought Lumi is just Lumi. She's sunshine and laughter. She can't be connected to any of this strange power stuff. But what if she is? What if she needs protecting from it more than I thought? Lumi thought Jin is just Jin. He's quiet shadows and calm. He's my best friend. He doesn't belong in a world of chi and energy. But he felt that too. What if he's somehow involved? What if I need to protect him even more? They walked side by side back to their apartment, closer than ever. Yet for the first time, a sliver of mysterious distance lay between them. Not of separation, but of a secret they each now held about themselves, wondering, with a flutter of fear and awe, if the other person might just be holding one too. Chapter 11. Confessions in the Rain. The seed of doubt from the street festival didn't sprint to fear, but into a strange, new tension. For days, Jin and Lumi moved around each other in their shared apartment with a delicate carefulness. The air, usually so easy between them, felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. They both danced around the unspoken question. What did we feel that day? Lumi tried to break the tension with extra energy. Jin, let's try that new bubble tea place. It'll be an adventure. Jin responded with extra quietness. The weather report says it might rain later. It did rain. Not a gentle drizzle, but a sudden, torrential downpour that caught them halfway across the university quad on their way back from classes. One moment the sky was gray, the next it opened up with a roar. Run! Lumi shrieked, laughing, grabbing Jin's hand. They ran, hand in hand, sneakers slapping against the quickly flooding pavement. They were soaked in seconds, hair plastered to their heads, clothes heavy with water. Lumi's laughter was infectious, and soon Jin was laughing too, the strange tension washing away in the sheer, ridiculous joy of the storm. They ducked under the limited shelter of a large, ancient oak tree. Not their oak tree, but it felt like a cousin. They stood, panting and dripping, under its thick branches which only slightly softened the deluge. We look like drowned rats. Lumi giggled, pushing wet hair from her eyes. Very loud, cheerful drowned rats, Jin said, smiling. Water dripped from his nose. Their laughter faded, replaced by the drumming of rain on leaves and the closeness of shared space. They were huddled together for warmth, Jin's arm instinctively around Lumi's shoulders, her side pressed against his. She looked up at him, her blue eyes bright even in the gloom. Drops of rain caught on her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. And in that moment, with the world washed clean and roaring around them, all the unsaid things between them broke their dam. Jin, Lumi said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Lumi, he whispered back. They spoke at the same time. I have to tell you something. There's something They stopped. A nervous smile touched Lumi's lips. You first. Jin took a deep breath. The anchor was about to let go. Lumi, all my life, I've liked the quiet, the shadows, the calm. I thought that was just me, but it never felt complete. Not until I was sharing the quiet with you. Not until your sunshine made my shadows feel like home, not like hiding. His words, usually so measured, came out in a steady, heartfelt stream. You're not just my best friend. You're my everything, the light to my dark. I think I'm in love with you. I have been for a long time. He finished, his heart hammering against his ribs, terrified he'd just ruined everything. Lumi stared at him. Her eyes glistened, and for a horrible second, Jin thought she was going to cry. Then a smile, brighter than any sun breaking through clouds, spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. You big, quiet dummy, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That's my line. She grabbed the front of his soaked shirt. I was gonna say, my whole life, I felt like I was running, talking, shining too bright, and it was fun, but it was also lonely, like I was a flashlight in a big, empty room. But you were the room. You gave my light somewhere to be. Your quiet makes my noise feel like music. Your calm lets me fly without getting lost. I love your shadows, Jin. I love you. So much. Relief, warm and golden, flooded Jin's chest, washing away the cold fear. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He leaned down, and she stretched up, and in the pouring rain, under the shelter of the old tree, Jin and Lumi shared their first kiss. It was clumsy, and wet, and perfect, tasted like rain and popcorn and home. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and beaming, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. The rain didn't feel cold anymore. So, Lumi said, her forehead resting against his. What does this mean for the apartment? Rent-wise? Jin let out a breathy laugh, the most carefree sound Lumi had ever heard from him. I think we can figure it out. Hand in hand, they ran the rest of the way home, not caring about the rain at all. The storm outside was nothing compared to the joyful tempest in their hearts. Chapter 12. I do under an ordinary sky. They didn't wait. Why would they? They'd already spent a lifetime as friends. Becoming something more felt like the most natural next chapter. The wedding was small, held in the very park where they'd met, under their now majestic oak tree. It was a heartwarming blend of their worlds. Lumi wore a simple, elegant dress the color of sunshine, with a crown of tiny daisies in her hair. Jin wore a dark blue suit that almost matched his front door, looking more handsome and peaceful than anyone had ever seen him. Lumi's family cried happy, noisy tears. Jin's mother smiled a serene, knowing smile. Friends from both their lives mingled, laughing at how perfectly Jin and Lumi it all was. As they stood before their loved ones, holding hands, the officiant asked them to exchange their vows. Lumi went first, her voice clear and bright. Jin, you are my favorite place, my calm in every storm. You make my world make sense. I promise to be your light on dark days, your laughter in the quiet, and your best friend for every single adventure that comes next. I love you. Jin's eyes were soft. He took a moment, then spoke. Lumi, you are my sunshine. You brought color and warmth into a world I was happy to just observe. You make me want to be brave. I promise to be your shelter, your safe harbor, and the steady ground for you to dance on. I love you. They slid simple silver bands onto each other's fingers. As the rings settled into place, something extraordinary happened, but only for them. To everyone else, it was a beautiful, slightly breezy afternoon. But Jin and Lumi both felt a powerful, silent click in the center of their beings, as if two cosmic keys had turned in tandem. A rush of energy, his cool and deep as a midnight lake, hers warm and bright as a noon sun, flowed between them through their joined hands, meeting in the middle in a perfect, harmonious circuit. Above them, visible only to their eyes, the sky seemed to flicker. For a single, breathtaking second, the sun and a phantom moon overlapped in a perfect, miniature eclipse, haloing their clasped hands in a ring of twilight and dawn. A feeling of immense, ancient power, now gentled and bound by love, sighed through their souls. They gasped simultaneously, their eyes locking. Then the sensation was gone. The sky was just the sky. The breeze was just the breeze. The officiant said, "You may now kiss." They did, a kiss full of promise and wonder. As they pulled away, Lumi whispered, her eyes wide. "Did you see that? The sky. It was strange weather," Jin murmured back, his thumb stroking her hand where the ring now Saturday, our own personal weather. They laughed, a little giddy, and wrote it off as the most powerful, beautiful adrenaline rush of their lives. A secret sign just for them that they were meant to be. They were pronounced Mr. and Mrs. Kim. But to each other they were just Jin and Lumi, finally home. Chapter 13. Domestic Divinity. Married life was blissfully normal, and hilariously, secretly, divine. Their little apartment became a true nest, a laboratory of their hidden love and even more hidden powers. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, their quirks now charming habits to the other. Lumi was, by her own admission, a catastrophic cook. One evening, determined to make Jin his favorite stew, she got distracted by a beautiful sunset and let it burn. A thick, acrid smoke filled the kitchen. "No, no, no," she wailed, waving a towel at the smoke alarm. Jin came in, coughing. "It's okay, we can order." "I wanted it to be perfect," Lumi said, pouting at the charred, inedible mess in the pot. In her frustration, that warm, golden feeling in her chest spiked. She didn't mean to do anything, but she glared at the burnt stew with a fierce desire to fix it. A faint, butter-yellow glow, invisible to Jin, pulsed from her fingertips towards the pot. The blackened crust shimmered and reconstituted itself. The smell of smoke vanished, replaced by the rich, savory aroma of perfectly cooked stew. Lumi blinked. Jin blinked. "Ha!" Lumi said, peering into the now pristine pot. I guess it wasn't as burnt as I thought. Maybe it was just smoke on the lid." Jin, who had seen a definite blackened disaster 2 seconds ago, looked from the perfect stew to his wife's confused, hopeful face. He felt a faint, cool trace of something in the air, her power, though he didn't recognize it, and smiled. Must have been a trick of the light. Looks amazing. He wasn't fooled. But the idea that his sunny, chaotic Lumi might have a magical touch in the kitchen was so endearing he chose to believe her explanation. Jin, for his part, had a supernatural talent for finding lost things. Lumi was constantly misplacing her keys, her phone, her favorite pen. "Jin, keys emergency. I'm late," she'd call, frantically dumping her bag on the floor. Jin would calmly walk into the room. He'd feel a quiet intention to find what brings her light. The cool thread in his chest would gently pull his attention. A shadow under the couch would seem a little deeper, or the darkness inside her tote bag would seem to shift. He'd reach into the exact spot and pull out the lost item. "How do you do that?" Lumi would ask every time, amazed. You just need a system, he'd say with a shrug, hiding a smile. His system was an ancient, shadow-based affinity for locating what was hidden, but she didn't need to know that. Their home was a fortress of these unnoticed miracles. A drafty window in Jin's study would always feel warm when he was working late, Lumi's subconscious desire to keep him comfortable. A plant that Lumi was sure she'd overwatered would perk up overnight, Jin's subtle shadow magic balancing its moisture. A stack of books that threatened to topple over would right itself at the last second. A burnt-out light bulb in a hard-to-reach fixture would flicker back on after Lumi blew it a kiss. They were caring for each other in the most fundamental magical ways, all while believing they were just a particularly lucky, in-sync couple. Chapter 14. The First Messenger. A cultivator at the door. The first intrusion from the past came on a Tuesday. Lumi was home alone, repotting a peace lily and singing off-key to the radio. The doorbell rang. Standing on their welcome mat, which read "Go away" in cheerful letters, a gift from Lumi, was a man in an impeccably tailored modern white suit. He had silver hair and eyes that were a pale, piercing gray. He looked serious and oddly formal. "Can I help you?" Lumi asked, wiping soil on her overalls. The man's gaze swept over her, and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He took a deep breath as if smelling the air, and then he did something shocking. He placed a fist against his palm and bowed deeply from the waist. "Holy Radiance," he said, his voice reverent. "Forgive this blunt approach. The Order of Celestial Light has sensed your reawakening. The whispers on the wind speak of your purified light. We have come to serve. It is time to reclaim your throne and resume the sacred war against the creeping shadow." Lumi stared. She blinked. Holy Radiance? Order of Celestial Light? Sacred war? A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. This was it. The nonsense from the library, from her nightmares. It was finding her, and it was calling her Holy Radiance. Her mind raced. They think I'm that goddess. They want me to fight shadows, to fight Jin's calm, gentle darkness. The very idea was obscene, but more than anything, a fierce, protective instinct flared. If these people are here for me, they might find Jin. They might think he's in the way. They might try to hurt my quiet, mortal husband to get to their goddess. Over my dead body, she put on her best, most confused face. She tilted her head, letting her curls bounce. "I'm sorry, what? Are you filming something? Is this a prank show?" She looked around for hidden cameras. The man, introduced as Elder Kai, straightened, looking perplexed. "This is no jest, my lady. Your power, though veiled, sings to us. The purity." "Look, Mr. Lumi said, crossing her arms, channeling all her energy into playing the baffled mortal. "I'm Lumi Kim. I'm a horticulture student. I kill succulents regularly. The only holy radiance I know is my sun lamp for my seedlings. You've got the wrong person." Just then, Jin came up the stairs, returning from the library. He saw the strange man at his door, saw Lumi's posture. Cheerful on the surface, but he knew her well enough to see the tightness around her eyes. He felt a sudden primal chill in his core. A threat. To Lumi. He walked up, placing himself subtly between Lumi and the man. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice calm but leaving no room for argument. The moment Jin approached, Elder Kai flinched. His pale eyes snapped to Jin, and he took an involuntary step back, as if repelled by an unseen force. He didn't see a heavenly demon god. He saw a young man in a dark sweater, but he felt it. A deep, abyssal cold. A silence that swallowed light. A protective aura so dense it made the air around Jin feel heavy and still. It was the natural predator to his light. This is your mate?" Elder Kai stammered, his composure cracking. "My husband," Lumi said brightly, linking her arm with Jin's. She felt Jin's arm tense, cool and solid under her touch. "See? Totally normal people. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have to water the air plants. They're very demanding." She gently pulled Jin inside and closed the door, leaning against it with a whoosh of breath. Outside, Elder Kai stood frozen for a moment, a cold sweat on his brow. The report would be confusing. The radiance was present, but dormant, living with a mortal who carried a shadow so profound it chilled his very soul. The situation required observation. Inside, Jin looked at Lumi. "Who was that?" "No idea," Lumi said, her laugh a little too high. "Some weirdo from a new age cult, I think. Asking about inner light or something. Bizarre." Jin said, watching her. He'd felt the man's energy. A prickly, bright power that had made his own instincts rise in quiet defense. And he'd seen the man's fear. He was afraid of me. But why? Unless he sensed something. Something I need to hide. For Lumi's sake. They both made a mental note. Weird light cult. Potential threat. Protect spouse. Chapter 15. The Second Messenger. An emissary from the abyss. The second messenger came 2 weeks later, at night. Jin was taking out the recycling to the bins behind their apartment building. The alley was dimly lit by a single, flickering sodium lamp. A woman stepped from the deeper shadows near the dumpster. She was dressed in elegant, modern black, her hair like a sheet of obsidian. She moved silently. As Jin turned, she knelt on the damp asphalt, head bowed. "Your abyssal majesty," she said, her voice a smooth, low whisper. "The shadow sanctum has felt the stirrings of the eternal twilight. We have awaited your return for eons. The forces of the arrogant light are mobilizing. Your legions yearn for your command to rise and reclaim the balance they shattered." Jin froze, the bag of cans forgotten in his hand. Abyssal majesty, shadow sanctum, eternal twilight. The words from his nightmares, from the old book. They were here. For him. They thought he was that destroyer god. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through him. But overriding it was a single, clear thought. Lumi. If these people were here for him, they were a danger. They spoke of war against light. Lumi was light, warm, cheerful, human light. They would see her as the enemy. They might try to harm her to get to him or to protect him. The idea sent a ripple of genuine, icy anger through him. and the flickering alley lamp guttered and died, plunging them into near total darkness. The woman, Madame Ling, took it as a sign of his displeasure and bowed lower. "Forgive my presumption, Majesty." Jean forced the cold anger down. He had to protect Lumi. That meant playing utterly, completely dumb. He switched on the flashlight on his phone, pointing it at the ground. Ma'am? Are you okay?" he asked, making his voice sound young and concerned. "This is just the back of a Thai restaurant. I think you're lost. Or, are you in a LARP? Live-action roleplay? My wife does that sometimes." He offered a tentative, benign smile. Madame Ling looked up, confused. In the stark phone light, he just looked like a handsome young man holding recycling. But the darkness around him, it felt alive, attentive, respectful. It didn't match his words. Just then, the back door of the building opened, and light spilled out. Lumi stood there, a silhouette. "Jean? Everything okay? You've been out here a while." She stepped into the alley. The moment Madame Ling's eyes fell on Lumi, she hissed, recoiling as if scalded. She felt it. A blazing, purifying radiance that threatened to unravel the very shadows she revered. It was the ancient enemy, walking casually in sweatpants. You live with that?" Madame Ling whispered, horrified. "That's my wife," Jean said, his voice hardening slightly. He walked over to Lumi, putting an arm around her. "Like I said, we're just normal people. You should probably go." Madame Ling vanished, melting into a shadow that seemed deeper than it should have been and was gone. Lumi peered into the darkness. "Who was that?" "No clue," Jean said, guiding her back inside, his heart pounding. "Asking for directions, I think. Very dramatically." "Weird," Lumi said, snuggling into his side. She'd felt a brief, hostile darkness from the alley that had made her own inner light flare in readiness. But Jean was here, safe. That was all that mattered. As they went upstairs, Jean thought, shadow cult. They think I'm their king. They see Lumi as a threat. I have to keep her away from them at all costs. Lumi thought, another weirdo. She felt dark. And she was scared of me? Maybe she's one of that light cult's rivals. I can't let their drama touch Jean. Chapter 16, the game begins. That night, over a dinner of takeout noodles, they had the talk. "So," Lumi said, twirling noodles on her fork. "Weird day. First that light cult guy a while back. Now this shadowy direction asker lady. What is with this city lately?" Jean nodded, taking a sip of water. "It's strange. They both seemed intense. Like they really believed in their cosplay. Right?" Lumi said, gesturing with her fork. "All that holy radiance and abyssal majesty stuff. So cheesy. I almost felt bad for them, you know? Like their fantasy world is really real to them." Jean agreed. "It must be lonely, living like that, seeing enemies in shadows and light." They locked eyes for a beat too long. A silent, profound understanding passed between them, layered with 1,000 lies of omission. "He's playing along for me," Lumi thought, her heart swelling with love. "He has no idea it's real, and he's just humoring me. I have to keep him safe in his normal, beautiful world. She's pretending it's nothing to protect me," Jean thought, a fierce tenderness gripping him. "She's so brave, laughing off these dangers. I will be the wall that keeps this madness from her door." Their shared, secret mission, to protect their blissfully ignorant mortal spouse from ancient, fantastical nonsense, became the deepest layer of their marriage. The game was on, and the first rule was, maintain absolute, convincing normalcy at all costs. Chapter 17, the art of pretending. Their life became a delightful, secret comedy of concealed divinity. They developed elaborate, mundane cover stories for their inevitable slip-ups. Jean, after finding Lumi's lost earring in the vacuum cleaner bag for the third time, decided he needed a hobby that explained his preternatural awareness. He took up Tai Chi in the park on Saturday mornings. "It's about energy flow and awareness of space," he explained to Lumi as he practiced slow, graceful movements in their living room. "It helps you notice the subtle things, like the whispers of shadow that tell me where your things are," he didn't add. Lumi thought it was adorable. She'd watch him, her heart full. He's so smart. He's creating a logical reason for his cleverness. He has no idea his real reason is he's a magical shadow king. "I love him so much." Lumi, after accidentally reviving a completely dead basil plant on the windowsill, decided she needed a cover too. She became enthusiastically interested in alternative wellness. She bought crystals and placed them around the house. "This clear quartz is for amplifying energy," she'd say, placing it on the router. "And this rose quartz is for love." She'd put it on Jin's pillow. When the dead plant sprang back to life, she'd gasp. "See? The citron must have channeled solar energy." Jean would nod solemnly, hiding a smile. She's so creative. She's built a whole beautiful, silly system to explain her miraculous touch. She has no idea she's a goddess of light. She's perfect. Their excuses became an intimate, unacknowledged game. A shelf that fixed itself after Jean bumped it was really well made. A spilled glass of milk that Lumi cleaned up without a trace was because it was mostly on the easy wipe mat. They were the world's most powerful beings, playing house and loving every minute of their shared charade. Chapter 18, Jealousy, Divine Edition. The messengers, of course, did not give up. Elder Kai returned, this time finding Lumi alone at a coffee shop. He approached, more cautiously, and began speaking of the glorious purpose of the light, of the stain of shadow that needed cleansing. From across the street, Jean saw them through the window. He saw the serious man in white talking intently to his smiling, but clearly uncomfortable wife. That cold, territorial chill from university days returned, 100 times stronger. It wasn't just jealousy now. It was the instinct of a sovereign whose territory, whose heart was being encroached upon. He didn't cross the street. He simply focused his will, a gentle, quiet command to the shadows in the coffee shop corner. The specific patch of shadow under Elder Kai's chair deepened and grew cold. So cold it felt like sitting on a block of ice. The man jumped, his lecture cut off. He looked around, confused. and his eyes landed on Jin standing outside, watching him with an unervingly placid expression. The warmth of the cafe seemed to drain away. Muttering an apology, Elder Kai hurried out, giving Jin a wide berth. Jin walked into the cafe. Everything okay? That guy looked intense. Oh, him. Lumi rolled her eyes, but squeezed Jin's hand gratefully. Just a really passionate solar panel salesman. I almost bought a timeshare in a sunbeam. Similarly, Madame Ling attempted to approach Jin while he was browsing in a used bookstore. She materialized beside him in the dusty philosophy aisle. Majesty, the sanctum grows impatient. The light-bearer is a vulnerability. Let us remove her, so you may ascend unencumbered. A white-hot fury, bright and terrible, flashed through Jin. But before he could react, the shop doorbell jingled. Lumi walked in, calling, Jin, you here? Madame Ling turned to see her, and at that moment Lumi, sensing a familiar, hostile darkness, let her protective instinct flare. Not a big glow, just a subtle pulse of get away from my husband. The old light bulb above the philosophy aisle, which had been flickering for years, suddenly flared to full, brilliant, almost painful intensity for 3 seconds, bathing Madame Ling in a light that felt like a physical blow. She vanished with a hiss, retreating into the bookshelves. Lumi walked over. Who was that? She had great hair. No one, Jin said, pulling her into a hug, breathing in her sunshine smell. Just asking if we had a book on pessimistic poetry. Boo, pessimistic, Lumi said, kissing his cheek. Let's go home. They walked out, each convinced they had just scared off a dangerous fanatic who was harassing their innocent spouse. Chapter 19. United front without knowing. The separate visits became a nuisance. They decided independently to take more direct action to protect their home. Jin waited until Lumi was at a late class. He focused, reaching for that cool, deep well inside him. He didn't want to hurt the light cultists, just discourage them. He envisioned a warning, a mark. He let a tendril of his power, shaped by his protective intent, drift across the city to the discreet townhouse the Order of Celestial Light used as a headquarters. Inside, Elder Kai was compiling his confusing report. Suddenly all the lights went out. Not a power cut. The darkness was absolute, silencing and alive. Felt ancient and watchful. On the wall, written in a condensation colder than ice, were words that glowed with a faint purple-black light. The radiance is under my protection. Approach again, and you will learn why shadows were feared. The darkness lifted as suddenly as it came. The order was thrown into panicked, reverent chaos. The demon god was awake, and he was claiming the goddess. Meanwhile, Lumi, while Jin was at the library, decided the shadow cult needed a talking to. She concentrated, summoning that warm, golden power. She sent a pulse of pure, clarifying light towards the underground lounge the shadow sanctum operated from. Madame Ling was in a council meeting. A light, gentle as dawn but inexorable as the sun, filled the room. It carried no heat, but it felt like truth, like a purifying gaze. It dissolved their carefully maintained shadows and echoed with a silent message that rang in their bones. The twilight is my heart. Your war is over. Linger near him, and I will remind you what light does to parasites. The light faded. The sanctum members were left pale and shaken. The goddess was awake, and she was claiming the demon god. Both Jin and Lumi returned home that night feeling satisfied. You'll never guess, Jin said over dinner. Those solar panel guys finally took us off their call list. Must have gotten the hint. That's great, Lumi said, grinning. And you know that gloomy poetry book club? I think they disbanded. The city just feels cleaner, doesn't it? They high-fived over the table, each believing they had single-handedly solved the problem for their beloved normal spouse. Chapter 20. A quiet night, roaring pests. That night, curled together on the couch, a documentary about the cosmos playing softly on the TV, the charade felt thinner than ever. Lumi was draped across Jin, her head on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, a steady, slow rhythm. But beneath that rhythm, if she really focused, she could feel something else. A deep, humming power, cool and vast and quiet, like the gravitational pull of a dark star. It was comforting. It was him. Jin had his arms around her, his chin resting on her golden hair. He could feel her warmth, the lively energy that always surrounded her. But beneath that, he sensed a reservoir of glowing, brilliant power, warm and infinite as a galaxy of suns. It was exhilarating. It was her. They both knew. The coincidences were a mountain. The weird cultists were too specific. The shared, reactive power at the festival. The miraculous little fixes around the house. The way they could sense each other's moods as if they were weather systems. The perfect eclipse at their wedding. The truth was a giant, sleeping dragon in the room with them. Lumi traced a pattern on his shirt. Jin. No matter what, we're us, right? Just Jin and Lumi. He kissed the top of her head, his voice a soft rumble in his chest. Always. Nothing in any past or future could ever change that. And that was the deeper truth, the one that mattered more than any heavenly title or demonic sovereignty. They had been enemies in a forgotten age. They might be gods in hiding now, but in this life, in this living room, they were just two people wildly in love. They both chose this love over those legacies. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them, not as a threat, but as a secret they were keeping together. A sweet, terrifying, and wonderfully intimate game. As they drifted to sleep, their powers, completely at peace, did something new. Without any conscious intent, they gently intertwined. A barely visible, beautiful aurora of soft gold and deep violet light shimmered into existence for a moment around the sleeping couple. A silent testament to a bond that had turned eternal war into eternal warmth. Chapter 21. The Converging Storm. The piece they'd carved out was fragile. A beautiful soap bubble surrounded by thorns. The warnings Jin and Lumi had sent to the factions didn't end the pursuit. It amplified it. News reports began featuring strange, atmospheric phenomena over their city. A localized, perfect ring of clouds that glowed at dawn, unexplained patches of cold, silent darkness in the middle of sunny plazas that security cameras couldn't penetrate. The mundane world dismissed it as unusual weather or pranks with new tech. The cultivation world knew better. The Order of Celestial Light and the Shadow Sanctum, terrified and ecstatic, had reached the same conclusion. Their deities were not only awake but were together. This was unprecedented, catastrophic, and mind-boggling. Was it a trap? A celestial conspiracy? An unholy alliance? The only way to know was to force a confrontation, to make their lords remember their true selves and their sacred, opposing duties. Tension crackled in the unseen layers of the city. Jin and Lumi felt it in their bones. A static in the air, a pressure change in their souls. Lumi found herself instinctively brightening dim corners of their home, her light reacting to the gathering gloom outside. Jin's shadows grew more defined, clinging protectively to the edges of their rooms, ready to swallow any threat. They still played the game, but the playfulness was edged with a new vigilance. Forecast says more weird cloud stuff tonight, Jin remarked, watching a news clip of the glowing ring over downtown. Probably just pollution and light, Lumi said, watering her plants with extra focus. One of them, a night blooming cereus, pulsed with a soft golden light for a second before returning to normal. She pretended not to notice. They exchanged a glance. The bubble was shrinking. The thorns were getting closer. Chapter 22. The Ultimatum. The thorns arrived on a Saturday morning, right at their doorstep. Simultaneously, Jin was making tea. Lumi was attempting yoga poses in the living room. The doorbell didn't ring. Instead, two distinct knocks sounded. One crisp and clear, the other a low, resonant thump, as if struck on the wood from opposite sides. They both froze. The energy from the other side of the door was unmistakable. A piercing, collective brightness and a deep, pooled collective darkness, both swirling with intent. We have to answer it, Jin said, his voice calm. The anchor. Together, Lumi said, standing up, her face set. The kite, ready to fight the wind. They opened the door. On the left side of the hallway stood Elder Kai, flanked by 4 others in light gray suits, their auras a subdued, surgical white. On the right stood Madame Ling, with 4 figures in elegant charcoal gray, their presence sucking the light from the hall sconces. The two groups glared at each other with millennia of hatred, but both focused on the couple in the doorway. Elder Kai spoke first, bowing to Lumi. Holy radiance, the time for pretense is over. The cosmos is out of balance. Your light is needed to lead the final purge, to scour the shadow from this and every realm. You must awaken. You must remember your glory. His gaze flicked to Jin with disdain. And you must leave this containment. Madame Ling immediately countered, bowing to Jin. Abyssal majesty. The arrogant light seeks to eliminate all nuance, all rest, all balance. Your twilight is the truth of the universe. You must rise and command the shadows. Crush the searing tyranny of light once more. She shot a venomous look at Lumi. And you must sever this attachment. Jin and Lumi listened, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The words were not new, but hearing them shouted in the hallway of their apartment building, with neighbors potentially listening, made it terrifyingly real. Lumi was the first to break the silence. She put on her best, most baffled face, tilting her head. Okay, wow, you're all very committed to this live-action game. Really impressive costumes. But, again, you have the wrong people. She squeezed Jin's hand. We're Jin and Lumi Kim. We filed joint taxes. We have a cat named Machi. He's hiding. This is our home. You're scaring our cat. Jin nodded, layering his calm over her brightness. I suggest you take your roleplay elsewhere, before we call the building manager about hallway disturbances. His voice was polite, final, and carried a subtle, undeniable weight that made the shadows in the hall seem to lean in. The factions were not swayed. Elder Kai's eyes glowed faintly. We feel your power, radiance. Why do you deny it? Madame Ling's voice echoed slightly. We see your truth, Majesty. Why do you hide in this shell? The pressure in the hallway intensified. The light bulbs flickered. The air grew cold and hot in patches. The facade was cracking under the direct assault. Chapter 23. The facade cracks. Lumi's patience, always shorter than Jin's, snapped. She dropped the confused act. Her posture straightened, and though she didn't glow, her presence seemed to amplify, filling the space with an undeniable, waking warmth. You want to talk about my light? She said, her voice losing its chirp, gaining a resonance that was both beautiful and terrifying. My light is what warms his tea in the morning. It's what helps my plants grow. It's the happiness I feel when my husband comes home. She looked at Jin, her eyes softening for a second before hardening again towards the factions. It is not a weapon for your pointless war. Jin stepped half a pace in front of her, not to hide her, but to stand with her. The calm around him deepened into a profound, watchful stillness. The hallway shadows stopped flickering and instead became solid, deep pools. You speak of my shadows, he said, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the tension. My shadows are where she rests. They are the quiet that holds her laughter. They are the peace I find in our life. He looked at Lumi, love shining in his eyes before his gaze turned icy on the emissaries. They are not a legion for your ancient grudge. The representatives were stunned into silence. This was not a denial of power, but a redefinition of it. Their gods were using the language of mortals, of domesticity, to describe cosmic forces. Elder Kai recovered first, desperation in his voice. But the prophecy, the eternal conflict, is over, Jin and Lumi said in unison, their hands still clasped. For a moment, their combined will, her defiant light, his immovable shadow, pushed back against the pressures in the hall. The two groups actually took a step back. But the factions hadn't survived eons by giving up. Elder Kai and Madame Ling shared a look of grim understanding. If their deities refused to awaken willingly, they would have to be forced to remember. You leave us no choice, Madame Ling said. We must remind you of who you are, Elder Kai finished. With synchronized nods, the two factions, ancient enemies, temporarily united in a single goal. They raised their hands. White light and pure darkness gathered in the confined space, not to attack each other, but to create a resonant field aimed at Jin and Lumi, a combined, awakening pulse. Chapter 24. A pact renewed. The world dissolved into blinding white and crushing black. For Jin, it was a roar of memories. A citadel of obsidian, the respectful silence of billions, the cold, satisfying power of entropy, the betrayal of a spear of light. For Lumi, it was a scream of memories. A crystalline spire, the adoration of countless souls, the warm, righteous fury of creation, the usurpation of a creeping void. It was the past, screaming to be let back in. In the heart of the storm, amidst the chaos, they found each other, not with their eyes but with their souls. His cool, deep presence, a familiar harbor in the madness. Her warm, bright core, a guiding star in the confusion. They didn't fight the memories. They accepted them. They saw the battles, the hatred, the loneliness. They saw the heavenly demon god and the goddess of primordial light in all their terrible, lonely glory. And in that shared vision, they made a choice. Together, Jin's consciousness wrapped around the memory of the demon god, not as its master, but as its wiser successor. I am not you, he thought at the ancient echo. I have found something you never had. I choose her. Lumi's spirit faced the memory of the goddess. I am not you, she declared. Your war was your prison. My love is my power. I choose him. With that joint, silent vow, they did something impossible. They didn't reject their past powers. They integrated them, filtered through the lens of their present love. The awakening pulse didn't shatter their modern selves. It was absorbed, refined, and made theirs. The light and shadow in the hallway convulsed and then streamed into them, not as a possession, but as an acknowledgement. The pulse ended. The hallway was normal, if slightly scorched and frosted in patches. Jin and Lumi stood, unchanged outwardly, but their eyes held a new, profound depth. They had seen everything. They knew. Elder Kai and Madame Ling stared, hope and fear warring on their faces. My lady, my lord. Lumi took a deep breath. She looked at Jin, a secret, knowing smile playing on her lips. He returned it with a slight, almost imperceptible quirk of his brow. The game had evolved. Now, they weren't just pretending to be normal for the other's sake. They were pretending to be normal together, as a team, to protect the life they'd built from the ghosts of who they'd been. Wow, Lumi said, blinking and shaking her head, her voice returning to its normal, bright tone. That was some crazy shared hallucination. Did you guys pump gas into the hallway or something? I saw like dragons and castles. Wild. Jin rubbed his temples. A very intense psychological suggestion, coupled with hypnosis through flickering lights, perhaps. He looked at the stunned emissaries with polite concern. You should really be careful with that technology. Could be dangerous. The factions were left utterly, completely bewildered. The pulse should have worked. They had felt the power being absorbed. And yet, here their god stood talking about gas leaks and hypnosis. Defeated and confused, the two groups retreated, melting away down the hall and the stairwell, leaving Jin and Lumi alone. They closed the door, leaned against it and slid to the floor, sitting side by side. After a long silence, Lumi whispered, So, you're a demon god, and you're a goddess of light, Jin replied. Arch enemies, sworn to destroy each other across eternity. They looked at each other, and then, they burst into laughter. It was relieved, slightly hysterical, and utterly joyous laughter. This is the weirdest marriage ever, Lumi gasped between giggles. I think our couple's counselor might need a raise, Jin agreed, wiping his eyes. When the laughter subsided, they grew serious again. Jin took her hand. The rules have changed. They know where we live. They won't stop. Lumi nodded. Then we stop them, not as a demon god or a goddess, as us, as Jin and Lumi. A third path, Jin said. Our path, Lumi confirmed. They sealed the new pact with a kiss, their powers, now fully acknowledged internally, humming in contented harmony between them. Chapter 25. The Divine Bicker. With the truth out in the open between them, their domestic life took on a new, hilariously divine dimension. They could stop pretending with each other, but they maintained the facade for the world. This led to bickering that would have leveled cities in their past lives. It started over chores. Lumi, love of my life, son of my existence, Jin said, staring into the living room. Did you, in a fit of divine housekeeping, purify the dust molecules into non-existence? I was going to use the vacuum. Lumi, lounging on the sofa, didn't look up from her plant magazine. They were offensive dust. They disrupted the feng shui. My light judged them unworthy. She grinned. Also, I hate the sound of the vacuum. You can't just vaporize household dirt, Jin sighed, but he was smiling. He snapped his fingers. From the shadows under the couch, the actual physical dust bunnies rolled out into a neat pile in the center of the room. There, judgment suspended. You can compost them for your plants later. Lumi stuck her tongue out at him. Another time, Lumi was trying to hang a new, heavy suncatcher in the window. Jin, oh great lord of darkness. Could you summon a tiny, helpful shadow hand to hold this while I fix the hook? Jin, reading nearby, didn't move. A tendril of solid darkness peeled from the corner, shaped itself into a polite, hand-like form, and held the suncatcher steady. It complains that the glitter is tacky, Jin said dryly. Your shadow has no taste, Lumi retorted, securing the hook. It's beautiful. It makes rainbows. It makes chaotic light refractions that disrupt the peaceful gloom of my reading nook. Your peaceful gloom is a safety hazard. I nearly tripped on a concentrated patch of serenity yesterday. They bickered over the thermostat. His shadows made it cold. Her light made it warm. Over what to watch. She wanted bright, cheerful musicals. He wanted atmospheric more films. Over grocery shopping. He could theoretically summon items from the store's shadows, but she insisted on supporting the local economy and getting steps in. It was all playful, all heartwarming. Every argument ended with laughter or a kiss. Their divine powers had become extensions of their personalities, tools for their domestic life. The heavenly demon god used his command of the void to find the remote control. The goddess of primordial light used her purifying radiance to sterilize kitchen counters. They were, quite possibly, the most powerful and most mundane couple in all of creation. Chapter 26. Training montage incognito. The factions were quiet, but the threat wasn't gone. They needed to be ready, so they began to train, secretly of course. Their training was a masterpiece of subterfuge. They told each other they were taking up new hobbies. "I'm going for a jog along the river path," Jin would say, kissing Lumi goodbye. He'd then spend an hour in a secluded, shadowy gorge, not jogging, but practicing. He learned to stretch shadows into shields, to solidify darkness into platforms to walk on, to dampen sound and light in a localized area. He practiced control, finesse. His power wasn't about destruction anymore. It was about protection, concealment, creating safe spaces. He thought of it as advanced home security. "I have a late horticulture club meeting," Lumi would chirp. She'd go to the university's rooftop greenhouse at night. There, she'd practice condensing light into gentle, healing orbs that could mend cracks in the concrete. She learned to project warmth in precise beams, to create veils of light that could dazzle or conceal, to sense life energy in the plants around her with pinpoint accuracy. Her power wasn't about purging anymore. It was about nurturing, revealing truth, creating growth. She thought of it as advanced gardening and mood lighting. What they didn't know was that their training sessions were perfectly synchronized. While Jin practiced shadow shields by the river, Lumi, on the rooftop, would instinctively practice light lances that could pierce such shields, not to break them, but to understand their strength. While Lumi practiced healing orbs, Jin, in his gorge, practiced shadow tendrils that could gently disrupt energetic fields, not to harm, but to learn their rhythm. They were unknowingly training to fight with each other, their ancient opposition now the perfect template for a seamless, unstoppable defense. Their souls were practicing teamwork, even while their minds thought they were training alone. They'd return home, flushed and happy. "How was your jog?" Lumi would ask. "Refreshing. The river was calm." "You?" "Great. We propagated some ferns. Very fulfilling." And they'd both be telling the truth from a certain point of view. Chapter 27. The First Joint Defense. The attack came not from the main factions, but from a splinter group, a radical cell from the Shadow Sanctum that believed Jin was a traitor who needed to be eliminated to free the true demon god. They ambushed Lumi as she walked home from the market. 3 figures wreathed in aggressive, sharp shadows stepped from an alley, cutting off her path. "Lightbearer," their leader snarled. "You have bewitched our sovereign. Your existence ends now." Lumi sighed, putting down her grocery bags. "You know, I just bought these fresh berries. They're going to get squashed." The shadows lunged. Lumi didn't flinch. She raised a hand, not to blast, but to illuminate. A sphere of pure, gentle sunlight bloomed around her, not attacking the shadows, but holding them at bay. The dark tendrils hissed and recoiled from the inviolable barrier. "I don't want to hurt you," Lumi said calmly, "but you're messing with my Saturday." The radicals redoubled their efforts, pooling their power to create a spear of concentrated void aimed at her heart. At that moment, Jin arrived. He hadn't sensed the attack through her light, but through the disturbance in the shadows around her. He saw the spear forming, saw Lumi's defensive orb. Fear and fury turned cold and precise in his veins. He didn't shout. He simply stepped from a patch of darkness behind the attackers, his movement silent and seamless. As the void spear shot towards Lumi, Jin raised his palm. A disk of absolute darkness, deeper than the spear, appeared in its path. The spear didn't clash with it. It was absorbed, swallowed without a sound into Jin's shield. The radical spun, faces pale. "And Majesty, you dare," Jin said, his voice low and resonating with an ancient, terrifying authority he usually kept buried. "You dare raise a hand against my heart?" The shadows of the alley, once their tools, turned against them. They wrapped around the radicals, not to crush, but to immobilize, sealing them in cocoons of silent, powerless dark. Lumi let her orb fade and walked over to Jin, slipping her hand into his. "Took you long enough. I was about to have to get serious and wilt their eyelashes or something." Jin's terrifying aura vanished instantly. He looked at her, worry in his eyes. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. The berries might be traumatized, though." They looked at the cocooned radicals. This was their first open, joint use of power. There were witnesses in apartments above. They had to maintain the cover. Lumi looked up at the windows, then back at the shadows. She winked at Jin. With a thought, she sent a pulse of light into the cocoons. Not to free them, but to give them a convincing, mundane appearance. The shadows now looked like thick, black industrial netting. Jin caught on. He manipulated the nearby shadows to mimic the flashing of dim blue and red lights. He used a trick of sound dampening to create a faint, distorted walkie-talkie static. To anyone looking from above, it looked like a trio of peculiar cultists had been swiftly and professionally apprehended by some kind of elite silent SWAT team using weird nets and lights. "We should go," Jin murmured, "before the authorities we're impersonating actually show up, right? My berries need a safe space." Lumi picked up her bags. They walked home, arms around each other. The pretense was still there, but it was now a shared performance art. They had fought not as god and goddess, but as husband and wife. And they were unstoppable. Chapter 28. The weather has been so strange lately, right? The incident was on the local news. Bizarre cultist apprehension by unidentified tactical unit. The story was a minor curiosity. At home, the truth hung between Jin and Lumi, palpable and enormous. They made tea and sat at their kitchen table. "So," Lumi said, blowing on her chamomile, "the whole shadow-stepping, void-absorbing thing, that's new." The impenetrable sunlight orb was also a nice touch, Jin replied. Very shiny. Thanks. I've been practicing. They sipped their tea. The silence was comfortable but charged. They called you Majesty, Lumi said softly. They called you Lightbearer, Jin responded. They looked at each other over the rims of their mugs. The last veil was gone. They both knew the other knew. Lumi's lip trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of it. You're really the heavenly demon god. Jin reached across the table, taking her hand. And you're really the goddess of primordial light. Tears welled in Lumi's eyes, but she smiled. We're so weird. The weirdest, Jin agreed, his thumb stroking her knuckles. I'm sorry, she blurted out. In the past. For the war, for the spear. I saw it in the pulse. I'm so sorry, Jin. Jin's eyes were equally bright. No, I'm sorry. For the cold, for the siege, for the loneliness I brought. I saw it too. I never want you to feel that from me again. It wasn't an absolution for ancient deities. It was an apology from two souls who had seen the pain their old shells caused and grieved for it. That's not us anymore, Lumi whispered fiercely. We're different. We're better, Jin said. Because we found each other. Not as enemies but as friends. As this. They didn't need to say it aloud. The game of pretending not to know was over, at least in the sanctity of their own kitchen. They had faced the past and chosen their present. Just then, a rogue breeze from the window made Lumi's golden curls flutter, and a sunbeam hit Jin's face, making him squint. They both laughed, the heavy moment broken. See, Lumi giggled, pointing at the sunbeam. Even the weather agrees. It's been so strange lately. Incredibly strange, Jin said, smiling, the love in his eyes brighter than any light, deeper than any shadow. Chapter 29. The Choice. A Third Path. The main factions, humiliated by the failure of the awakening pulse and the defeat of the radicals, decided on a final, desperate gambit. They would unite their forces not to awaken their lords, but to force them into conflict, hoping the instinct of millennia would override their modern affections. They chose the city's central square, a wide, open space flanked by old buildings. As the sun set, painting the sky in dramatic colors, members of the Order and the Sanctum formed a wide circle around the perimeter. They began a combined chant, weaving a dome of alternating light and dark energy over the square, a cage designed to provoke their essential natures into clashing. Inside a cozy bookstore at the edge of the square, Jin and Lumi felt it immediately. A grating, discordant pull, like two hooks in their souls trying to drag them apart and make them fight. They looked out the window, saw the glowing dome, saw the familiar faces of Elder Kai and Madame Ling leading the chant. They just don't give up, do they? Lumi sighed, putting down the book she was browsing. They're scared, Jin said, watching the energy cage. They think the universe will break if we don't play our old parts. Then let's show them a new part, Lumi said, determination sparking in her eyes. Hand in hand, they walked out of the bookstore and into the center of the square, under the shimmering dome. The chanting faltered as the two factions saw their deities approach, not with wrath, but with calm unity. Elder Kai's voice echoed. Holy radiance, break free, see the shadow for what it is. Madame Ling cried. Abyssal majesty, cast off this illusion. Remember the blinding enemy. The dome pulsed, the pressure to fight increasing. It felt like standing in a psychic earthquake. Jin looked at Lumi. Ready, she smiled. Always. They didn't attack the dome. They didn't attack each other. Instead, they turned to face the circle of cultivators. Jin raised his free hand. Lumi raised hers. From Jin's hand flowed a river of serene, beautiful darkness. Not a void, but a velvety, star-studded twilight. It was peace, rest, quiet contemplation. From Lumi's hand streamed a beam of gentle, nurturing light. Not a purge, but a warm, golden dawn. It was growth, hope, joyful clarity. Instead of clashing, the two streams met in the air above them. And they didn't explode. They danced. They wove together in a breathtaking, double helix pattern of twilight and dawn, creating a new, third energy. A radiant, shadowed harmony. This energy expanded outwards in a silent, gentle wave. Where it touched the combative dome, the dome didn't shatter. It transmuted. The harsh light softened. The aggressive shadows mellowed. The cage of conflict became a beautiful, shimmering aurora of blended colors that then harmlessly dissipated. The wave washed over the cultivators. They didn't feel pain. They felt understanding. A vision of a world where light and dark were not enemies, but partners. Where the goddess's warmth nurtured the demon god's calm, and his calm gave her warmth a place to exist. They felt the profound, unshakable love that was the core of this new power. The chanting stopped. Weapons lowered. Tears streamed down the faces of hardened cultivators. They had spent lifetimes preparing for a war that the main participants had not only resigned from but had transcended. Elder Kai and Madame Ling stood stunned, their ideologies crumbling before the simple, overwhelming truth of what they witnessed. Jin spoke, his voice carrying to every ear without raising. The war is over, not because one side won, but because we found a better way. Lumi's voice rang out, clear and bright. We are not your weapons. We are not your generals. We are Jin and Lumi. This is our home, and we protect what we love. They had shown their choice. Not light, not shadow, but us. Chapter 30. Eclipse. The silence in the square was profound. The cultivators, from both sides, simply stared, their purpose evaporating like mist in the new dawn Jin and Lumi had created. Elder Kai finally stepped forward, his face a mask of awe and crumbling conviction. But the cosmos balance. Is this not balance? Lumi asked, gesturing to the air where their intertwined energies had just faded. Pure light blinds, pure dark stifles. Together, they create a world you can see and live in. Together, they create life. Madame Ling approached from the other side, her defiance gone, replaced by wonder. What are we to do? Our lives, our purpose. Find a new one, Jin said, not unkindly. A better one. Tend gardens. Write poetry. Help people. Protect this world with its shadows and light. Not from them. The message was clear. The age of the heavenly demon god and the goddess of primordial light was over. A new age had begun quietly, in a small apartment, and had just announced itself in a city square. The factions, leaderless and purpose lost, began to disperse, not in defeat, but in a kind of dazed liberation. The tension that had gripped the city for months lifted. Jin and Lumi were left alone in the middle of the square as the last of the cultivators melted away. The sun had fully set, and the first stars were appearing. Lumi leaned her head on Jin's shoulder. Think they'll finally leave us alone? I think, Jin said, wrapping his arm around her. They'll be too busy trying to understand what they just saw to bother us for a very long time. Above them, as if giving its final blessing on their union, a perfect, natural celestial eclipse began. The moon sliding over the sun. The sky darkened into a deep twilight, and the sun's corona blazed a brilliant, gentle ring around the dark disk. They watched it, not as a sign of conflict, but as the ultimate symbol of their love. Two opposites, meeting in perfect harmony, creating something more beautiful than either could alone. Our own personal weather, Lumi whispered, echoing their wedding day. The only kind we need, Jin replied. As the eclipse reached its peak, they turned to each other. In that moment of celestial unity, under the watchful eyes of the stars they both loved, Jin, the once demon god, and Lumi, the once goddess, shared a kiss that held the peace of twilight and the promise of dawn. They were home. They were not leaving. They were just Jin and Lumi, together, forever, having finally turned an eternal war into an eternal love. The end. Like, share, comment, and subscribe Fabulous Story Cafe for more fabulous stories.